Good morning. Hi, I'm Mike Jones, the Hermit of Lockyer. This is my post-Christian discussion, and today we're going to be moving into how we find truth. Another term for it, a philosophical term, a fancy term, is epistemology. Come join me for this conversation. Until now, I've been having this discussion about why people are leaving Christianity, and I've tried to make it clear, based on studies, based on conversations, that if you combine the most common reason, it's over the issue of dishonesty. And dishonesty that people complain about who are leaving Christianity are in two categories, that of factual dishonesty and emotional dishonesty. Now, when I say factual dishonesty, I'm not talking about religious dishonesty. I mean, some people would say, well, we believe in God. Is that a lie? Is that what you're talking about? No. I'm talking about practical dishonesty about the world. And I'm trying to make this clear, and I'm not going to spend much time on that anymore. But today I want to get into how do we discover truth in the first place? I think it's worth discussing. Now, what I bring to the table in these discussions, I don't have many gifts. These days, after having a big bout with cancer and still struggling with it, I feel like I have very little to offer the world. I don't have many talents. I'm not that articulate. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. There's people who know these things much better than I do. But if there is anything I bring to the table, it is honesty. For some reason, I've always desired honesty, even as a kid. As a kid, I observed how pretentious our world was and how people would say one thing but actually did other things and that kind of thing. And then the 30 years I spent in evangelicalism, I often got in trouble because I would see things that were so dishonest and sort of point them out. And in that culture, there's tremendous pushback when you challenge things, and it made me unpopular, I think. But then when I had my break with evangelicalism in 1990, now my pre-existing orientation I just described probably led to this, but I left Christianity completely because the dishonesty was overwhelming. And I think that's the reason a lot of people leave. In my description today on YouTube, I put in two YouTube links to individuals who've left Christianity. Now, one of them, I think his name is Seth. I forgot his last name now. He's sort of a comedian, and you have to have thick skin because he really bashes Christianity. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you probably wouldn't want to watch it. Excuse me. I've been fighting pneumonia for 6 weeks. I'm almost over now. So anyway, still have a cough. It's part of the cancer I have, that you're very vulnerable to infections. But anyway, the Seth guy, he does a brutal attack of Christianity. But the point I'm trying to make, he does point out these inconsistencies and things that it's behind why so many people are leaving. As I said before, on the conservative side, they want to blame those people leaving and take no responsibility for this. On the liberal side, I really think they don't care because they've adopted a postmodern viewpoint that all opinions are the same. So if you leave Christianity and become a Buddhist, there's no problem with that. Or if you become an atheist, no problem with that because all views are the same. But anyway, so today I'm going to make a transition, and I'm going to start looking, how do we find truth to start with? Because there's an inherent problem in Christianity, in the way we find truth, and I think it's worth discussing. Now, our society as a whole is in an epoch now of loss of truth, and that's due to this pop way of thinking of postmodernism, that there is no truth. It's popular because When you say there's no truth, there's no, all opinions are the same, you think it brings in social peace. It doesn't, but that's another story. So it's a general trend in our culture, but Christianity, and I think probably Islam and many other religions, has had an intrinsic problem with truth all along, and there's reasons for that. Today I'm going to dive into the philosophical reason. I'm going to try to make sense of this. It's a very nebulous thing of trying to identify errors that we make in finding truth. So I'm going to break it down. I'm going to be talking about the philosophical reasons, then I'm going to be talking about the psychological reasons, sociological reasons that we have trouble finding truth. Now, I've tried to make a case so far that it is true that Christian religious people have difficulty with truth. I think some of these things I've shared before, but there are studies that looking at conspiracy theories. Now, let me explain what I mean by conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory isn't just an alternative view or a disagreement view. It's an alternative view that's usually very passionate, that has zero evidence of being true. Zero. There is no evidence. For example, I'm not political, but the idea that the Democrats stole the election from Donald Trump is a right-out lie. There is no evidence of that. None. Look at the people who know. The Republicans who ran the vote, the elections, each state, they've reviewed this. The Supreme Court says there's no evidence of this. So anyway, that's an example of a conspiracy theory. In America, one of the most common groups for having conspiracy theories as a whole in America, I think 10% of people, 1 in 10 people they hold a conspiracy theory, at least one. But among conservative Christians, 50% hold conspiracy theories. And these are ideas that have no basis, no evidence whatsoever. So why is that? Why is that? So today when I talk about philosophical reasons, I talked about this a little bit last time, this idea of philosophical or metaphysical dualism. It's a big word. I don't want to lose you. And I mean, if you're someone who studies philosophy, you're thinking I'm being way too trivial and too simple. But someone who's not familiar with these terms can get lost a little bit. Dualism is simply, there's a divide. There's two sides of this divide. And in this concept of philosophical dualism, there's a divide between the material, what is seen, and what is unseen. It's that simple. Now, Plato, he's not the originator of dualism. Other people had that same thought. I was thinking about this. I like anthropology quite a bit. But if you go back to, let's go back to the Neanderthal. And the Neanderthals disappeared about 40,000 years ago. But think of yourself as Neanderthal. Neanderthal, you may not know this, have brains bigger than humans, Homo sapiens. So they weren't stupid. They did art. They made tools. They lived in clans. They interbred with humans when humans arrived. But imagine if you're a gatherer, wanderer, say 100,000 years ago. You would recognize that there are things that you can touch and feel, material things. And there's things that to you seem invisible, that have power. And the most common of those was air. They couldn't see air. Of course, they had no concept of molecules of nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide and those things that make up air. That to them it was, I don't know if they thought it was a mystical thing, but they just didn't understand it. You know, air could move your hair, it can move the leaves on a tree. And later on, thousands of years later, when they started making windmills and sailboats, probably sailboats first. There's some evidence that they may have been using sailboats as long as 40,000 years ago. Maybe Homo erectus even before that. So they could harness the wind power, but they couldn't see it. So to them, it was the other, the invisible. And that concept of the invisible got translated later and later. So I'm going to say some very bold things going forward, and Christians this might be too far for you to build your mind around. Virtually every word in the Bible that has anything to do with spiritual is from either the Hebrew word, and I can't remember, roth, I can't remember, it's a word for air, or the Greek word pneuma, which is air. So it's in that same category of invisible when it's talking about spiritual. Now, when it talks about spiritual, like our souls, our spiritual souls, it doesn't talk about supernatural. It talks about that part of us that's invisible. And consciousness is invisible. We're now being able to study the human brain much better, and we understand consciousness and our personalities and those things much better. But to those people, including the time when the Bible was written, it was an invisible force, our personalities, our persona, and it was considered spiritual because it was like air. It was invisible. So anyway, there's a division that occurred between the material, dirt, rocks, trees, work, brains. Reason was put into the area of the material because, I mean, now, of course, we know that reason comes from the brain. So those things, do it studying, science, observation of the stars, all those things are in the material. And then there was an assumption that there was another realm, Plato called it the ether or the area of forms of the invisible, and the church grasped onto this. It wasn't just the church, it was even before the church was established. There were several sects that came up around Christianity that said the only thing that was important was the invisible, that everything you could see was of insignificance, or some of the Gnostics, early Gnostics, said everything you could see was garbage. Garbage. This planet was garbage, our bodies was garbage, our reason was garbage, everything that we did was garbage. Now, the church had to combat that because that also would mean that Jesus, if he lived in the body, was garbage. So that couldn't be true. So the Gnostics said that Jesus never lived in the body. He was a ghost. He floated around throughout his whole life from the time he was born. He was never in a physical body. Or if he wasn't a physical body, he wasn't God. He wasn't God's son. So it created a problem, a theological problem for the church, and they try to resolve that. However, and it's my opinion, and some historians may disagree with me, that the church seized on this opportunity of dualism, and just follow my train of thought here, that said, if the people believe that their everyday lives, their brains, their work, their food, their wives, their children, their animals, all these things are insignificant, if we keep them believing that, and this world, mountains and trees and rivers and nature and all those things are insignificant, but only the invisible is significant, we can have tremendous power over people because the church held the keys to the invisible. At least that's what they taught. So that became the Dark Ages. Thinking stopped, writing stopped, not completely, but compared to what came later, all these things shut down. If you look at the art, go back and study the art for the first 1,200 years of Europe, and you see all of it is about the spiritual. And again, the spiritual, when you hear the word spiritual, you'll probably think of supernatural things. There's no evidence it's talking about supernatural things. It's just simply talking about air, the invisible, the souls, God, the invisible. You don't see God in person. All those things are invisible. And the church was the conduit to those spiritual things. So you had to pay money to the church. You had to obey the church. And the church came up with lots and lots and lots of dogmas. That, just think about the Inquisitions, the Spanish Inquisition. I was in Malta and visited the home of a bishop where he was the head of the Maltese Inquisition. He had a torture chamber in his basement that was just awful. Torturing people near death. Then he'll try to, help them recover enough to torture them more because they didn't agree with all these dogmas. So the church and the king and the rich people, the aristocrats, all were in bed together with absolute authority, and they capitalized on this idea of dualism. Well, that idea of dualism has carried forward until today, and I'll give you practical examples of what I'm talking about. I'm going to get into this later when I talk. It's still on this topic, epistemology, of how we find truth. In my opinion, and I've spent years thinking about this and studying about this, that the God's gift to humanity, the only instrument God has given humanity for finding truth is reason. Reason is not perfect. It has flaws. But in reason, you gather evidence, you evaluate the evidence in a very mathematical way, and you reach conclusions. And that's reason. And in the vast majority of our lives, 99% of our lives, we use reason all the time. And that's the only way we try to gather information. Now imagine for a moment, and I'm trying to make this practical, you want to go to the store and get milk. We tend to run out of milk a lot. Don't tell my wife, but I give our St. Bernard a lot of milk. She likes it. I like it. But anyway, we often have to go to the store and get milk. Think of the process of going to the store to get milk. I mean, I could break it down to 1,000 or 10,000 parts, but you go to start your car, you know your car's going to start. Why? Because of the evidence. There's an evidence that you've started your car every morning. It always starts. You start your car, you know if you turn the steering wheel this way, it goes that way, and you turn it, that goes that way, because you've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. So you drive, you know where the store is because you've been there hundreds of times to get milk and other things. And you know to turn right here, turn left here, red light means to stop. This is all logical stuff. You get to the store, you know they have milk because you've been there many, many times. This is mathematical deduction. You've been there many times and gotten milk. You know they have milk. You get the milk, you pay for all these things. All these steps are completely logical. Now imagine if you operate your daily life in the same way we operate our so-called religious life, is that you wake up in the morning, do we need milk? I won't look in the refrigerator. I would just, I will feel the answer to this question. No, we don't need milk. So we don't need milk. And then you open the refrigerator and there's no milk. Oh, I was wrong. Okay, maybe we do need milk. So I'm going to do something irrational to get milk. I'm going to go to this big fir tree out in the yard and going to punch it and milk's going to come out. There's no evidence that that's ever happened in the history of the world. It doesn't matter. That was your intuition. That was your invisible way of gathering truth. So, in religion, in Christianity, you know, my trajectory in 1990 should have led me into being a hard, cold atheist. And I say that because I observe the ridiculous things around me, and I came to this conclusion that we were lying all the time to each other. We were emotionally dishonest, so those things. So I left Christianity, and it wasn't except for this deep feeling that if there is a God, I want to find God. I want to have a relationship with God again. But because for 30 years I have been the punching bag of Christians, and I am so tired of it. And here's the number one issue, why I am the punching bag. Because I believe, and all atheists believe, and all Christians believe in their practical, their 99% life, that logic and reason and observing evidence and making deductions is the way we find truth. That when I mention thinking, I'm immediately accused of not being a Christian, because Christians don't think. They have a relationship. They have an experience. You know, if I have not had a relationship with God in the last 5 years, and I've mentioned this before, I spent almost 2 years in intense pain on the floor day and night, crying my eyes out, praying nonstop, day and night. I would doze off for 10 minutes and then the pain would wake me up. My life was ending. I had just a few months to live. I was talking to God in an intimate way that I could not fathom ever having such a relationship with God. And then Christians walk up to me often and try to tell me that my relationship with God is not legitimate because I use reason. And they use mysticism. They use irrational spirituality. And my point is, Christianity is very vulnerable to dishonesty and the problem of truth, because these things called spiritual, I believe you cannot tell the difference between that and the human emotions. The human emotions are wonderful, God-given. They make us cry. They make us laugh. They're the Tabasco sauce of life, but they're not the instrument for finding truth. Psychologists talk about emotional reasoning is very dangerous. You know, someone says, well, I'm depressed because everyone hates me. I'm worthless. You know, that's emotional reasoning. What's that based on? What's the evidence that everyone hates you? What's the evidence that that you're worthless. There's no evidence. It's emotional reasoning. So in your Christian journey and your relationship with God, if you require it to be invisible, what you would call spiritual, in this dualism, they put all the emphasis on the upper story, the invisible things. Those things have value, but the things of the earth are fleshy. They're not of God. So if you put all your thoughts that your relationship with God is 100% invisible, or what you would call spiritual, what I would call emotional, and then people like me who say, I reach conclusions through reason, like everyone does, but I'm honest about it. They love to tell me that I'm not a real Christian, and I'm really, really tired of it. I'm tired of it. And that's why people have left Christianity in droves. So anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. I am becoming emotional because it's so painful. And I think I've already mentioned in my vlogs I've done that I try to interject science. I think science is really good, and I'll get into that later. And, there's all these conspiracy theories that Christians put forth. When they have no evidence, anybody, not just Christians, political people, if they have no evidence, they put out conspiracy theories to cover for that lack of evidence. So in this dualism, here is the problem, and I'm going to try to summarize it here, is that when you have a philosophical concept that everything of this material earth is inferior, including reason, including collecting evidence, all those things are inferior to the invisible, the so-called spiritual, suddenly you've lost your ability to find truth. Really, you lost your ability to find truth. Now, there's people listening to this, and I've had this conversation over and over. People look me in the eye and say, oh, when God speaks to me, it is so clear. It is so clear. I'm going to tell a story. I like telling stories to try to illustrate something here. When I was probably a sophomore in college, I was taking a philosophy class, and our philosophy teacher, like many, was a very outspoken atheist. Now, he was also dishonest. He was dishonest in this way. He said, in my class, we will not discuss religion. Religion has no part in philosophy. Because he was teaching in the Bible Belt, so he knew he was going to have pushback. However, at the same time, he attacked Christianity over and over and over every day. So in this class was myself, and there's also probably 3 or 4 other people that was part of the Navigators, the group I was involved with. Excuse me. And so there was so much pushback from students who wanted to defend Christianity when he was attacking it. For example, one day he gave the illustration that marijuana did everything that Christianity did, but did it better. But he wouldn't let us say anything about Christianity on the positive side. So he decided after our final exam, anyone in the class who wanted to come and talk about Christianity would come, and he would come and sit as a moderator, but he wouldn't be that involved with the discussion. Well, the class was packed. And I remember him asking the honest question that everyone should ask: how do you know God exists? Where is the evidence? Without getting on the sidebar, I'm really pleased to find there are Christians today. John Lennox is one. The Biologos group are people who are calling their Christianity evidence-based Christianity. And some people's hair will stand up. Well, that's not faith. Faith is blind jumping into the dark. Well, then faith would make you a Satan worshiper, a worshiping trees. If you have no evidence, you just jump into the dark and believe anything. What good is that? But it's good for me to hear about evidence. But anyway, so this professor is asking for evidence to prove that God exists, and I'm sitting here. I have some social phobias. I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to say? And this girl in our group, sitting beside me from our Navigator group, she said, I know God is there because there's a God-shaped void in my heart, and God fixed it just like a piece of puzzle. And I could see him thinking that is, in an area of searching for truth, that's a Hallmark card stuff. As a matter of fact, she got that saying from a Billy Graham movie, I think it's called Time to Run, that we just watched together a few weeks earlier. This is your evidence that God exists. There's a God-shaped thing in your heart, or God has spoken to me. Now, at that same time, my degree was in psychology, and I'd been spending time at a inpatient mental hospital not far called Green Valley, part of my training. And there we had a lot of psychotic people. I remember one man that would parade up and down the halls. He was 100% sure he was Napoleon. And he was giving orders and orders. Lots of people in there who thought they were Jesus or thought they were Paul or thought they were God. They were 100% sure. Now that's an extreme because they were officially diagnosed with schizophrenia and other areas of psychosis. However, the Bible itself, and I think I've said this before, says clearly the human heart, which I looked for the Hebrew for that, and it comes down to the seat of emotions. The human heart, they felt it was in the heart because under emotional strain, you feel your heart beating faster. So for thousands of years, they thought the emotions were in the heart. So the human heart is the most deceptive thing created, more than anything else in the universe. That's a verse in the Bible. So when you tell me that you know God exists based on an invisible experience, I don't think you understand neurophysiology, how deceptive our brains are to us. That can't be the way that we discover truth. It can't be, because then there is no truth. Anything can be truth. And I think that's what's happened to many religious groups, that when they use a false system, a system of emotions for finding truth, then they get lost. Now, there's still, because of practical reasons, they follow reason and truth on the daily basis, buying milk, going to the store, things like that. And that's the big bulk of life. But the big questions, they get caught in these traps of lies. And when I first left Christianity back in 1990, my boss, who was a very abusive man, he's abusive to me, he's abusive to all the missionaries there, abusive to his own family. And that, I won't say that's why I left him, but that abuse is what woke me up. And our last conversation, very last time, I'm leaving the Middle East, I said, I'm going back. I'm going to start to look for truth. I'm going to examine everything. His eyes got big and he shook his head, said, you better not look for truth, because I had a friend who did that and he's an atheist today. Does that make any sense? I keep hearing, and just recently when I was attacked again, someone said, Mike, on your blog, you said you started searching for truth. God isn't truth. You need to search for God. Truth is secular. He was saying that even the concept of truth is in this lower story of reason and materialism, which is not of God. And that if I seek truth, I'm down here in this fleshy thing. I'm not a spiritual person. You have no relationship with God, Mike. What the hell were those years? I was laying on the floor talking to God day and night. What was that if that's not a relationship with God? He said, I don't have a relationship with God because I'm seeking truth and not God. This makes no sense. When I left Christianity in 1990, when I said I want to pursue truth at all cost, I remember praying in my apartment in Cairo. I said, God, if you exist, let me find you. But I'm going to seek truth, because if God exists inside truth. Does that not make sense? You know, is there a God that doesn't like truth, that likes lies? That, you know, there's either truth or lies. And again, when I talk about truth, in case you forgot, truth is simply that which is consistent with reality. What I was going to say earlier, a few years ago, I think I've mentioned this before, talking about what's in the Bible and what's not. You know, there's so many things in culture that we say is in the Bible, it's not there. But I sat down over several days and did a study of how often does the Bible talk about classical truth? You know, that which is consistent with reality. I found almost 500 references, either directly or indirectly. You know, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's not a mystical truth. It's not an experience he's talking about. He's talking about factual, evidence-based truth. And then I'm just going to mention one more thing, that if you look later in the New Testament, you know, about miracles that happen, it said it was given to give evidence that Jesus was the Messiah. This is what I said to the philosopher, or to the class professor who was a philosopher, after this girl had talked about the God-shaped void in her heart. I knew there's a philosopher named John Wisdom who wrote a parable of the invisible gardener. It's about God, and there's a clearing in the jungle, and this person claimed that there's a gardener making the garden. Anyway, I won't go into details about that, but I looked at the professor from the class, and I said, you know the parable of the invisible gardener, of course. And he said, yeah. And I said, here's the story. Here's some of my evidence that God entered, or the gardener entered the garden in presence of all the people, in the presence of Jesus Christ in history. And that's one of the evidences for which I claim I do believe in God. He shook his head. He understood that. But immediately as I got outside the door, this other navigator guy grabbed me and said, what are you talking about? You made no sense. I said, the class professor knew what I was talking about. And he said, gardener, you know, that makes no sense. You know, you can't find God in a garden. You got to know him in your heart, like she said. You know, anyway, that's just a take on it. You have a wonderful day. Hope you had a wonderful New Year's Day, and I hope this year, 2024, will be the best year of your freaking life. Bye.